Hey everybody, so today I'm going to show you how to construct this pattern that is made up of 8-fold star rosettes rotated at a 45-degree angle to where we normally see them rotated, with some congruent petals in the interstitial space between two rosettes. So let's get started. I'm at geogebra.org/classic and I'm signed in so that I can save my work. I'm going to go ahead and save this as today's date, and maybe I will call this 8-fold with squares 2, because I think I already have an 8-fold with squares 1. So I'm going to click save. I'm going to right click in here in my algebra view to hide my axes and my grid. I'm in my settings, and in my general settings, I'm not going to change anything. Algebra, I'm sorting by object type. I want to display by definition, and I want to show auxiliary objects. Under advanced graphics, I want to make sure my object labels are new points only. And then in my input bar, I'm going to type A equals open parentheses 0, 0, and B equals open parentheses 1, 0. I'm going to right click and drag over those 2 points to select them both. And I'm going to click Fix Object so that I can't accidentally drag either of those points off of their coordinates. I'm using my scroll wheel to zoom in, and then I'm going to grab my regular polygon tool, and I'm going to click on A first, then B, and put in a 4-vertex polygon, so a square on side AB. I'm going to select that square and I'm going to change the opacity to 0. Zoom in a little bit more. I'm going to grab my line tool and I'm going to put in diagonal line AC and BD. Then I'm going to grab my intersect tool and I'm going to construct point E so that this matches the variable names and vertex names and stuff in my step-by-step PDF, which I will link in the description. I am going to create a random point F over here next to point A that we will later delete and reassign. But somehow my labeling got off in my step-by-step PDF, but to be consistent, we're just going to add that point F there. All right, so then I'm going to grab my circle with center through point tool, and I'm going to put in circle AE and circle CE. Then I'm going to put in some radial lines using my angle bisector tool. So I'm going to bisect angle BAE and DAE. Then I'm going to take my reflect about line tool and I'm going to reflect this angle bisector over side AD. Then I'm going to grab my intersect tool and I'm going to put in points GH. Nope, that's not how I want to do that. Try that again. Wait for the cursor to change to a hand so that it just puts the single point there, GH and I. I don't want to select the line and the circle because it's going to create points on the other side of the circle. And so that our naming is consistent, we just want the single points at those intersections. So then I'm going to grab my line segment tool and I'm going to put in HG and HI. I am going to make those both have dashed green lines. So they're just helper lines that we will later hide. Where those 2 line segments intersect my diagonal, I am going to put points J and K. Let me make my font a little bit bigger for you. I thought it was 20, but it looks like it changed. Make it 24, so it's nice and big. J and All right, once I've got those points J and K there, I can go ahead and hide these two dashed lines. They aren't necessary. All right, next I am going to put in circle AJ and AK. And that's pretty much our underlying structure for this pattern. The rest of what we're going to construct is a lot of pattern lines. And this is going to be a variable angled pattern, so I need a slider. So I'm clicking up at the upper left, and I want an angle slider with minimum value 0.5, maximum value 41, and a step size of 0.5. So these are a little bit different numbers than I normally choose, but that's just because of the way this pattern is constructed. It gets kind of wonky when you do angles that are outside of these constraints. So feel free to change those, go from 0 to 90 if you want to see how the pattern breaks. You can always get back to these presets later. All right, so my slider doesn't do anything until I construct something that's dependent on it. So let's do something about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take point A and rotate it by this angle alpha about point J. So in my input bar, I'm going to type rotate, open parentheses, A, comma alpha, which I can get by typing Alt A, comma J, close parentheses. And now when I move my slider, I can see that point A prime rotating about point J. So then I'm going to grab my line tool and I'm going to put in line JA prime. And that's a pattern line, so I'm going to make it a distinct color. And if I move my slider, I can see that line rotate. All right, I'm done with point A prime, so I'm going to hide that object. I don't want to delete it because I need it to define that line, but I want to hide it so it's not in the way. And where that pattern line, that pink pattern line intersects this first radial line, I want to define a point. So I'm going to grab my intersect tool and I'm going to construct point L here. Okay. And I've almost got enough information to construct my first kite. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my reflect about line tool and I'm going to reflect this line first over diagonal AC, and then I'm going to reflect it over AL. And I'm going to grab my intersect tool and I'm going to define points M and N, and then I can grab my polygon tool and I can define that kite. Cool. Next, we're going to define a half kite triangle right here. So I'm going to grab my intersect tool. I'm going to define points O and P. And with my polygon tool, I'm going to construct triangle OLP. All right, then we need a couple more points. So with our intersect tool, I'm going to construct points Q and R on those angle bisectors that we made. Move the labels a little bit. And then I'm going to construct a petal right here that has vertices J, L, P, and R, but what I'm missing are the shoulders of that petal. So what I need is for those outer four edges of that petal to be the same length. And the way that we're going to achieve that is we're going to put an a perpendicular bisector between J and R. And this is a helper line. I'm going to give it a dashed green appearance. And where that line intersects this pattern line through M and J, I'm going to grab my intersect tool and define the shoulder point S. I'm going to get my other shoulder point by taking my reflective outline tool and reflecting S over line AR. So now I can grab my polygon tool and I can put in that first petal. So we're getting somewhere now. And I can go ahead and hide that angle bisector if I want to. I'm just going to leave it for now. All right, next, what we want is to construct a bird's foot shape right here. So I have some of the vertices that I need. I have J, S, and R. The next one we need is up here, and we're going to get that by taking our line tool and extending side length RS prime. This is a pattern line, so it's going to be pink. And where that intersects our diagonal AC, I am going to plot point T. And just move your slider and make sure you're defining point T so that it's sliding along that diagonal. And you're not accidentally hitting point E or point K. All right. So I've got half of what I need. I'm going to get the other half by reflecting point S over that same diagonal, and that gives me point S prime 1. I've already got point Q over here. And so now I can take my polygon tool and I can define that bird's foot like so. So there we go. We've got our nice little bird's foot shape. And that's a good point to save. Okay. Next, I want to construct a petal over here. And so I'm going to take my reflective outline tool and I'm going to select this petal and then diagonal BD to reflect that petal over here. I'm going to extend two of the sides of this petal, P prime L and R prime S double prime. Those are both pattern lines, so I'm going to make them pink. And where those two lines intersect our diagonal, I'm going to put in some points. So I'm going to put in point, actually, let me put the other one in first. So let me hide this angle bisector that we put in so that it doesn't get in our way. And we want to move our slider so that this line through R prime and S double prime is well away from points K and E, so that when we use our intersect tool, we can easily find that intersection. So that's going to be point U. So point U should slide neatly along that diagonal. And it's actually the mirror image of point T over diagonal BD. So that's another way to think about that point. And then I'm going to put in point V over here. If you put in this one first and got that one as U and this one as V, that's fine. You can continue to follow along, but those points will have swapped variable names. Okay. So now we've almost got enough information to put the kite up here. So I'm going to reflect L prime over the diagonal to get L double prime. I'm going to put in this polygon. Okay. And Then we're going to construct another helper line. So with my perpendicular line tool, I'm going to construct a line through point R that's perpendicular to this radial line through R. And that's a helper line. I'm going to make it green and dashed so that it's easy to find in my algebra view later. So before we use that, let's actually construct one more point. So with my intersect tool, I want where this radial line intersects the diagonal. So this is going to be point, oh, hang on, I need 2 more points. So first I need point W, which is the intersection of these 2 lines. And then this point is Z, where the diagonal intersects the radial line. So let me move my slider so you can see point W moving along diagonal BD, where those 2 pattern lines intersect, and point Z, where this radial line intersects the diagonal. Okay, now I'm going to use that perpendicular line that I constructed, and I'm going to reflect point S prime over that line, and then I'm going to use my line tool to put in a pattern line that passes through R and that reflected point S double prime 1. You could also have reflected this line over this line. When I hit undo, it undid my dash. So a lot of the things that we're going to do, there's multiple ways you can do them, and whatever way you like is up to you. Okay, so next what we're going to do is we're going to bisect angle RZB. So I'm going to grab my angle bisector tool, and I'm going to click R, then Z, then B. And this is a helper line, so I'm going to make it dashed and green. Notice that this passes through that point S double prime 1. And if I move my slider, it stays always going through that point. So that's pretty cool. That point travels along that angle bisector. And that's because these are both shoulders of a petal. So we're going to have a petal that lives right here. All right, next I want to grab my reflective outline tool, and I want to take this line and reflect it over that angle bisector. And I'm going to grab my intersect tool, and I want this point where that line intersects diagonal BD. So that's the top of my petal if we flip this thing around. And then I almost have the rest of the petal. I'm going to grab my reflective outline tool and reflect this point over here, and that gives me point B1. With my polygon tool, I can now put in that petal. Alrighty. Next, we're gonna almost construct this quarter octagon in this corner, but I'm not gonna actually put in the polygon because ultimately we want a half octagon there. So I'm gonna grab my intersect tool and I'm gonna put in point C1 right here. And then I'm gonna grab my line tool and I'm gonna put in line A1B1, which is a pattern line. And I want the point where this line intersects the bottom of the square. So you can adjust your slider to where that line is well away from point H, away from the circle, away from the green lines, so that it's easier to define that intersection. Or you can select that line and then select the bottom edge of the square. So a few different ways you can approach that. All right, next we're going to construct the other bird's foot that's going to overlap with our first one. Let me adjust my slider back down a little bit. So at 22.5 degrees, you get the classic version of this pattern that I showed at the beginning, where we have perfect horizontals and verticals. You just want to be careful that you're not constructing at this angle the whole time. Otherwise, you'll accidentally end up using some points that you shouldn't. So just be careful, always be moving your slider. All right, so next I've got the point U that's going to be the top of that bird's foot. Notice it is exactly on point K at 22.5 degrees. So I'm going to move my slider quite a bit so that it doesn't overlap there. And now I'm going to reflect point R over this diagonal, and I'm going to reflect S'2 over this diagonal. And very carefully select U, R double prime, E1, J prime, S'2, R prime, and then back to U. Move your slider, make sure things are working out the way they should. Excellent. Switching gears a little bit, we're going to complete this half star. So I'm going to grab my reflect about line tool and reflect point N over this first radial line. You could have just used your intersect tool here, but you've got to move your slider to make sure you're getting the right intersection, which is why I used the reflect about line tool, so just be careful. And I'm going to use my polygon tool to put in this quarter star. Okay. We don't actually want the two bird's feet shapes. What we really care about is this diamond or square that we get where the two shapes overlap. So we have 3 points that define that. What we need is the 4th point. The easiest way to get that is to reflect point W over diagonal AC. Hopefully that doesn't mess up our labeling too much, but that's point W prime. And I'm going to adjust my slider so that I can easily select U without getting too close to K. And I'm going to put in polygon U, W, T, W prime, U. Okay. Next, we want to construct a star, a full star around point C. I've got almost a quarter star up here. Let's do a little cleanup before we do this. So I'm going to go ahead and hide all of my pink lines and green lines just to clean up my construction a little bit. And I can also, let's not hide the circles just yet. I'm not sure if I need those later. I don't think we do, but we'll leave them for now. Okay, so we've got almost a quarter star over here. What I'm missing from my quarter star are points O and N prime. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reflect those 2 points over diagonal BD. And then I'm going to grab my line tool and I'm going to put in line BC and line DC. And I'm going to reflect these points around point C. So I'm going to start by taking L prime over the horizontal. Oh, it helps if I select my reflect about line tool. I'm going to reflect L prime over the horizontal, V over the horizontal. Oh, delete that. I'm not sure what happened. V over the horizontal, L prime over the horizontal, O prime over the horizontal. And then I'm going to take these points and reflect over the vertical. So L prime 1, V prime 1, L triple prime, N double prime. If your labels are different than mine, that's okay. I think I may have created an extra point somewhere. No big deal. All right, so now I'm going to grab my polygon tool and I'm just going to go in and out to create this star. And you'll find out if you remembered all of your points or if you missed one when you try to create that polygon. This is a good place to save. I'm going to hide the labels of those points except for point C, just so I don't have a bunch of visual clutter. You can leave the labels or not, it's up to you. Let me save. All right, let's go back and complete this half octagon down here. So I need to reflect this point over the vertical and point D1 over the vertical. And with our polygon tool, put in that half octagon. I need another petal right here. So I'm missing the reflection of the shoulder point and the reflection of that point, which I could have also gotten using my intersect tool. I'm going to use my polygon tool to put in that petal. Next, I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to construct a series of parallel lines. So first I want to construct a line that's parallel to diagonal BD that passes through this point C right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my parallel line tool and I'm going to select point C and then I'm going to select diagonal BD. Then I'm just going to take my reflect about line tool and I'm going to reflect this line over this line and then this line over that line to get a series of 4 parallel diagonal lines. Okay. So then what I want is a full star that lives right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in pretty far to where I see this star and this diagonal. And with my reflect about line tool, I'm going to select this star and this diagonal. And now if I zoom out, well, it didn't work. Let's try that again. Reflect about line. There we go. Not sure why it didn't work the first time. Maybe yours worked, mine didn't. All right, So cool, this is going to be the center star of our whole pattern. All right, next I need an octagon right here. The easiest way to get that octagon is to take our half octagon and reflect it over this horizontal line. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, reflect half octagon over the horizontal. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete this octagon, but the vertices will stay behind. So I'm going to select that octagon and I'm going to hit delete on my keyboard. And you'll see that the points stayed. So then I'm going to grab my line tool and I'm going to put in a horizontal line here. And I'm just going to reflect these 3 points over that line. And I can use my polygon tool to put in that octagon. All right, we're getting somewhere. Okay, so then next we need another half octagon over here around point D. Easiest way to get that one is to reflect this one over diagonal AC. So I just, with my reflective outline tool, select the half octagon and then the diagonal. Okay. Next we need a half star over here. So the easiest way to get that one is to take my quarter star and reflect it over that line. That should work, okay. And I'm gonna do pretty much what I did for my whole octagon, where I'm gonna delete this shape. The vertices stay behind. I'm gonna put in a line and then I'm gonna reflect these vertices over that line. And then I'm going to use my polygon tool to put in that half star. All right. We've got one more petal to create, and that's this diagonal petal up here. What we're missing from it are the 2 shoulder points. So I'm going to get those by reflecting these 2 shoulder points over the diagonal. So I'm going to take point B1 over diagonal AC and point S'1 over diagonal AC. And with my polygon tool, I'm going to put in that petal. And we're almost ready to construct our sequences. I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup before we do that. So I need to construct one more point. So I'm going to delete point F now, and I'm going to grab my intersect tool and I'm going to define the center of this star as point F. Let me save. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide all my points except for point A, point C, and point F. So if you arranged your objects in your algebra view by object type, then you can easily hide all your conics. You can select all your points by clicking the word point, and then I'm going to click checkbox next to show object, and then I'm going to re-show points A, C, and F. And we should be good now. I don't think I need these lines anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and hide those. I don't need this one anymore, so I'm going to hide that one. And I'm going to leave the rest of these for now. So next, what I want to do is I want to show some labels. So the first polygon we're going to work with is poly 2. And I'm going to create a sequence of rotations of poly 2 prime about point C by 1/8 of a circle, or 1/8 of 2 pi, which is the same as pi over 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type into my input bar, sequence, open parentheses, rotate, open parentheses, open curly braces, poly 2 prime, close the curly braces. So that's the thing I want to rotate. The amount I want to rotate by is pi times I over 4. I'm going to use my arrow key to get out of the denominator, comma, what I want to rotate about, which is point C, close parentheses, comma, my index variable is I, so this is the thing that's going to vary, and I is going to vary from 0 to 7. And I'm going to close my parentheses, and now you can see under list, M1 is that sequence. So now I can hide and show that sequence. I'm going to go ahead and hide poly 2 because I don't need it anymore. And then next we're going to make a sequence of rotations of the following. So I'm going to show the label for this one. So that's poly 4. This one, that's poly 12. This one, that's poly 9. This one, that's poly 2. And I also want quadrilateral Q3. So I'm going to show the label of Q3. I'm going to hide these diagonal lines. I don't need those anymore. But I do want to keep my verticals and horizontals because we'll use those. Okay, so I'm going to create a sequence of rotations of these 5 objects about point C. So I'm going to type sequence, rotate. In my curly braces, I'm going to list all those objects. So Q3, poly 2, poly 4, poly 9, poly 12. And I'm going to rotate by 1/4 of a circle, or 2 pi over 4, which is the same as pi over 2. So pi times I over 2. Use my arrow to get out of the denominator about point C, where I varies from 0 to 3. Close parentheses. That's what that sequence looks like. Zoom out a little bit. And now I can hide those objects. I don't need them anymore. It's easier to hide Q3 over here in the algebra view. Good point to save. All right, next we're going to make our big sequence of rotations. So we're going to rotate lists M1 and M2, and then we're also going to rotate everything except for our kites and our bird's feet. So I'm going to show the labels of my half octagons, my octagon, my half star, my quarter star, my full star, and I think we're good there. So go to the input bar, and these we're going to rotate about point F. So I'm going to type sequence, rotate, open curly braces, M1, M2, and then I want poly 6, poly 7, poly 8, poly 8 prime, poly 10, and poly 11. So this is a little bit different than my step-by-step PDF. I apologize for any discrepancies. We're rotating by pi I over, let's see, 1/4 of the circle, 2 pi over 4, so pi over 2. About point F, where I varies from 0 to 3. And so we're almost there. We've pretty much got it. I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup now. So I'm going to hide poly 1, poly 7, poly 10, poly 11. I'm going to keep poly 7 prime. That's my central star. I'm going to hide Q1 and Q2, triangle T1, poly 8, poly 9, list M1 and M2, and I'm going to hide these hexagons. So the only things I have visible now are L1, poly 7, and some of these verticals and horizontals. If I want a bounding square, I can take point A and reflect it. I can take point A and reflect it over the horizontal line, and then the vertical line, and then the horizontal line again. And I can create a polygon which I then adjust the opacity of, and I can change the color to match the rest of my construction. I can hide those 4 points. So either by right clicking or clicking the show object checkbox. And I can also hide these lines. This poly 7 prime in the middle, I need to change my line opacity to be 100%. And I'm going to change the color to match the rest of my construction. And now we can adjust our slider to see how the pattern changes with the angle, which is pretty cool. If you want the classic version, you want to be at, let's see if I can get there, 22.5, almost. There we go. 22.5 gives you the perfect little squares and verticals and horizontals. And don't forget to save your work. All right, thanks so much. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.